Okay, so this trade rumor, not even really rumor, but just idea that was tossed out there on the Hockey Now series of articles, I thought was a pretty interesting one. Because when you go over to the Metropolitan Division, you see all of the teams that are doing their thing, and you see who's doing well, who's bouncing back, and you talk about big standout performances from these teams. I feel like the New York Islanders are one of those teams that are in a really good spot. I know they weren't great last year, but when you take a look at the NHL standings, you'll notice that, hey, this Islanders team is right there in the wild card race. They've got 32 points so far, and, I mean, okay, they only have 86 goals on the year. That isn't really all too much in comparison to a lot of these other teams in the East, let alone in the Metropolitan Division itself. We know the reputation that a team like the Islanders has, where they're a lot more defensively tuned than some of these other squads in terms of their system and in terms of how they're assembled. But when it comes to big name players that could be heading over to Long Island and that might be of interest on their organization, let's talk about the guy that's probably the most talented playmaker in that entire crop of players. Let's go over to this article on New York Hockey Now, or not New York Hockey Now, excuse me, NYI Hockey Now. You gotta make that distinction because there's two New York teams. Published by Stefan Rosner. Is Chicago Blackhawks star Patrick Kane on the Islanders' radar? Pretty simple idea, pretty simple question, and what the article goes out there and discusses makes a lot of sense if you wanted to acknowledge just the idea in and of itself. Despite 16 wins on the season in 25 games while averaging 3.15 per game, there's no question that the Islanders need to add a score at the 2023 NHL trade deadline, which is why Rosner's going out there and writing about Patrick Kane. This season so far, Patty Kane is doing very well. I mean, okay, he's not doing as well as he had done before, but he's still doing pretty well. 20 points, 25 games played, 4 goals, 16 assists. He's on pace for 65 points on the year, which is a good season, all things considered. I mean, if most people go out there and say, hey, I scored 65 points in an NHL season, you'd be like, yeah, no, that's a really good year. It's just for Patty Kane, a 65-point year would be his lowest productive season since 2014-15, where he had 64 points in only 61 games played. Yeah, he's really good, and I think when it comes to how good Patrick Kane has been this season, a lot of that could be chalked up to the departure of Alex DeBrincat. You could say that the team is a lot worse. Domi, Athanasiou, these guys are some of the main scorers on the team alongside of Kane and Taves. And none of these guys are Alex DeBrincat, which makes Kane's job a lot more difficult because all of a sudden there's no more number one elite goal scorer to be feeding pucks to. But Rosner goes out there and writes that when the season began, it seemed like fate would have Kane reunited with Artemi Panarin on Broadway. But with the Rangers' struggles this season, the playoffs are anything but a certainty, which would put them out of the running since Kane wants to win now. If you can't beat him, you join him. That's the saying, right? Which is why the article is even being written about in the first place on whether or not Lamoriello and the Islanders have the necessary assets to get things done. Now, I will say, just before we go deeper into this topic, if Lou Lamoriello was able to pull this rabbit out of his hat, then I want to hear an apology for everybody that was getting pissed off at this guy for not making any acquisitions at the draft or during the free agency period, because we all know that was one of the bigger stories relating to the New York Islanders and their overall process. Hey, Lou is not addressing any of the team's needs. They need a scorer. Why is he not getting a scorer? This team was bad last year, this and that. They need to add a scorer, but Lou is not doing so. If the Islanders can pull something off where in this season's worth of play, they actually perform pretty well without the addition of an external goal scorer. Let's say they play well enough to find themselves in a pretty solidified wildcard spot, and then they add the goal scorer at the deadline. I feel like that long-term sort of planning is something that I wouldn't really expect out of a guy like Lou Lamoriello at this stage of his life. I was about to say career, but then I was like, wait, no. Life works a little bit there too. I feel like the Islanders would be in a pretty great spot if they were able to do that, be good enough to contend, and then add the goal scorer on top of that. Financially, Rosner writes about, the Islanders have $10.895 million to play with at the deadline, and they could fit in Kane's 10.5 AAV. The Blackhawks could also eat some salary given that Kane is on an expiring contract, and most teams in these types of situations do end up retaining. Now, the question is, what exactly could a return look like? Well, the best comparison to the situation is what transpired with Giroux last season. The Flyers captain on an expiring deal had a no-movement clause, and he made his way over to Florida for a first, a third, and top prospect Owen Tippett. The Flyers retained 50% in that trade, and the Blackhawks are likely to do the same. With that remaining dollar amount, the Islanders would have the ability to acquire a defenseman, which is also a team need if the Islanders want to make a deep playoff run. Now, that is a pretty interesting idea. If you get Patrick Kane and another defenseman in the same freaking trade, that would be pretty ambitious. But I mean, if Lou Lamoriello wants to go out there and do that, then hey, all the power to you. But Patrick Kane is indeed a better player than Claude Giroux, which is why the Islanders' trade offer probably includes a second-round pick. Aatu Raty is the Islanders' top prospect at the moment, and he could be included as well, but he should not need to be involved in this transaction. Now, pause. Let's go out there and talk about this idea right here. Aatu Raty is a prospect that I absolutely adore. This is a really good player, and if you've been following this YouTube channel for the past little while, you probably know that I just hope for everything and more with this guy. He's 20 years old, he's a big center, 6'2", 187, and he was a second-round pick by the Islanders after being a projected first overall guy. Not first-round guy, first overall guy. He was supposed to be first overall in the 2021 draft, but his draft season was just filled with so much disaster in terms of his production, in terms of getting cut from the World Junior team, that he slipped all the way down to round 2. Now, fortunately for him, he got taken by a team that still believed in him in New York, and he had a really good season last year, 40 points, 41 games played in the Finnish Liga. This season, he's in Bridgeport, he's got 8 points in 18 games played, first-year pro hockey player in North America, and he's on pace for about 30 points in 69 games played. Very nice amount of games right there. Now sure, Raty is sort of struggling when it comes to his Bridgeport Islanders production in comparison to last season, but we did make a video earlier in the season about how he actually did have his moments, and alongside of some other good prospects in the Islanders system, they're kind of cooking over there. It's really nice to see what the Bridgeport Islanders are providing for the long-term future, but for Aatu Raty, getting involved in some sort of a Patrick Kane trade would be very intriguing, because for the Blackhawks, I mean, if Raty goes out there and becomes what we think he could become, the Blackhawks might very well get themselves a guy that should have been first overall in the draft anyway. Like, you talk about getting the draft picks they did for Kirby Dach and Alex DeBrincat, and how 7th overall Kevin Korchinski is not a top-tier guy or whatever. There is a chance to get a guy that people thought should have been a first overall pick. Plain and simple. But, of course, if the Islanders don't want to depart with him, then that kind of just stomps the entire argument and idea into the ground. It was just interesting enough to bring up because I think that Raty is a really good player, and if you wanted to get good players, you might have to give up good players. And Raty for Kane is one that, in my mind, it sort of clicks and it makes sense. Obviously not Raty by himself, but Raty with a pick or two in exchange for Patty Kane. I feel like that is an interesting enough idea to go out there and make a video about. But, of course, Rosner's going out there and saying in this article that it should not have to happen like that. Raty is the best prospect, but he should not need to get involved in a trade like this. There's a little bit more of a discussion as to what exactly the deal could look like. If the Islanders did bring in Kane, Lamoriello would not be giving up that draft capital for a rental, so you could take out the first-round pick. But either way, the conclusion here made by Rosner is that if Kane gets acquired by the Islanders, Lamoriello would most likely want to sign him to a long-term extension and stick him alongside of Matty Barzal for the long term. Which actually is not that bad of a plan when you consider how good Barzal is. I mean, having Kane and Barzal together, ooh, that'd be pretty nice. I like the idea of that. The speed and the playmaking and the offensive prowess, that sounds exquisite. But, of course, you have to get the player first, and that's kind of why we decided to make this video here in the first place. So talk to the comments your thoughts about the Islanders and Patrick Kane, whether or not this is an idea that makes enough sense to you to actually try to explore it, and discuss whether or not these prospects like Aatu Raty is a good enough piece, or a piece that you are more comfortable with, to actually depart with in this sort of move, because I know a lot of Islanders fans love this guy. Raty, that is. We've made a few videos going over him and his profile, and I could tell the Islanders fans, y'all love this guy as much as I do, so I'm happy that he's being treated right in that fan base over there. But thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj 99, and bye.